Okay, what's happening, people? Somehow I can see a little bit of noise on my mic. Let me know if the microphone sounds okay, because I'm looking at the level here in OBS, my streaming software, and even when I'm not talking, when the mic's on mute even, there's a little bit of interference. So let me know if it sounds okay on the stream. Somebody can let me know in the chat. Okay, they're saying it sounds a bit staticky noise. Okay, one person's saying it sounds a bit staticky. Okay, some people saying a tiny bit of static. All right, one sec. Let me see if I can try and clear it up a second. One sec. Okay, there we go. Static should have disappeared, or mostly disappeared now. Figured out what it was. So we are live. We got a few bits and bobs to talk about here in the world of boxing, and then we'll get to your general comments and questions. So first of all, roll call. Let's see who we got in here. Shout out to High Noon, Rich Franklin, Ben, Peter, Spadge, Naeem. We got Nicholas, Kyle, Andrew. Yes, Dungargan. Don Gorgon, what's up? Danny. We got Benham. We got Brad. Jelly Mold. Adam. John B. Ocean Blue every time. Salute, salute. We got Gehabib. I think that's how you pronounce it. Sparks, big up. I am Mikey. The Joker. We got Feeney. Workstation, of course, every time. Big up Workstation. We got Warts. Shout out to Warts with his crazy name. Chris Mateus. Big up Chris Mateus. Shout out to Swaggins for the first super chat of the day. He says, yo, Hatman, I listen to your track, bro, and it goes hard. Hey, much respect. Which track was it? The one called Moses, because there's 3 tracks on that Rumble channel. Big up Mr. Woo Doc. We got Scouse Farm. We got Jay. Big up, big up. Danvers, yes, yes. Andy P. Yems Talks Boxing. Shout out to everybody in the chat, all right? We'll come back onto the chat room in just a moment. Let's just talk some boxing news here. I'll get myself oriented. And I really want to get your take on this, guys, all right? What happened to my music here? Music's gone missing. Oh, never mind. Guess we'll have to do without music. Somehow the music is misbehaving. Let's try this. No. So whenever I switch scenes like this, the music is gone. It's only appearing on the channel intro scene. Right. We'll have to do without the music. So let's talk about Fabio Wardley in this particular video, basically calling out Jarrell Miller. He says he wants all the smoke. He says he's ready to fight Jarrell Miller at, what's the name of the Ipswich Town Stadium? I forget the name of it. But he's ready to fight Jarrell Miller, if not Kubrat Pulev. Kubrat Pulev, I think, would be the preferred opponent for him because Pulev obviously has a regular belt. But if he can't get Kubrat Pulev, then he's ready to go with Jarrell Miller for the summer. What do you guys think about that fight? How do you see Fabio Wardley versus Jarrell Miller going? We'll have a look at Fabio Wardley's box rec. I'm sure you're all very familiar with him. 18-0. That one draw, which came to Fraser Clark in the fight before last. Obviously, he wiped Fraser Clark out in the rematch. And, of course, Jarrell Miller's last fight was that draw with Andy Ruiz, which most people feel like he was unlucky in because the majority of people are adamant that Jarrell Miller won the fight and got jobbed on the cards. The fight was in LA. Obviously, a lot of Mexicans in LA. Maybe that put pressure on the judges. What do you guys think about it? But yeah, that was Jarrell Miller's last fight. He hasn't been able to get back in the ring since. I'm not sure whether that's because of a lack of fighters willing to face him or because of the issues he's been having with his longtime on-off promoter, Dimitri Salita. That might be it. But in any event, you do have Fabio Wardley calling him out, saying he's ready for all the smoke. All right, if we have a look at the heavyweight rankings here, you'll see that Fabio Wardley is ranked number 1 with the WBA. Jarrell Miller is number 13 with the WBA. And interestingly, Miller isn't ranked by any of the other sanctioning bodies. Okay, Wardley is also number 11 with the IBF and number 6 with the WBO. Okay, so Wardley's got rankings, and he's also number 7, with the WBC. So Wardley's ranked by all of the major sanctioning bodies, but Jarrell Miller, unless I've missed something here, he's only ranked by one of them. And that's not even in the top 10. It's at number 13. Not that we're having a prayer party here for Jarrell Miller, right? I can't imagine too many people are sympathetic with him, given his history. But if the Wardley-Miller fight happens, how do you guys see it going? I think it's a very interesting fight, to be honest. Yeah, we know that Daniel Dubois stopped Jarrell Miller, but Jarrell Miller is a very, very tough man. He's extremely big. He comes forward. He lets his hands go. To me, he was definitely in better condition when he fought Andy Ruiz than he was when he fought Daniel Dubois. Taking nothing away from Dubois, but Miller did take that fight on short notice, and we know he's not exactly the cleanest liver, is he? Just look at the size of him. He came in a lot lighter against Andy Ruiz, and, you know, the first couple rounds were a little shaky for him because Ruiz got off to a relatively fast start, landed some big shots, but maybe it was a combination of Ruiz realizing he couldn't really budge Miller, Miller realizing that too, and also Ruiz's badly damaged hand, because he did mess up his hands seriously in that fight. He showed it in the post-fight interview, and it looked all sorts of jacked up, okay? You're not going to be able to perform to the best of your ability, especially if you're a come-forward pressure fighter who needs both hands. You're not going to be able to perform to the best of your ability if one of your hands is as jacked up as Ruiz's was, all right? Let's be real about it. So, yeah, I think that Miller was in better shape against Ruiz, and he performed well, threw a hell of a lot of shots. He's not the biggest one-punch knockout man you've ever seen. He really doesn't punch his weight, but he hits hard enough, and it's really just the physical strength and the pressure which gets to his opponents. Andy Ruiz, of course, a very tough man himself, so although he, in the eyes of most people, lost the fight, he didn't get stopped, right? Fabio Wardley, we know, has got that Super Saiyan mode. Whenever anybody puts it on him whenever anybody hurts him, tests him in any way. He comes out swinging. How would that work against Jarrell Miller? You know, Daniel Dubois is somebody who's far more experienced than Fabio Wardley. Far more experienced. Obviously, Wardley had no amateur fights, just a few white-collar bouts. Whereas, Jarrell Miller, I think he fought in the amateurs as a boxer. Don't quote me on that, but I think he did. But he certainly had a kickboxing career, and he certainly has, more professional fights than Fabio Wardley. So, yeah, how do you guys see that one going? I think it's a very, very interesting one. I'm hesitant to pick against Fabio Wardley again because I picked against him twice in the past, and I was wrong both times. I picked against him in the Nathan Gorman fight, and I was obviously wrong, and I picked against him when he fought, God, who was it? No, I can't remember if I picked against in the Fraser Clark fight. The first Fraser Clark fight, I can't remember who I picked, but it ended up being a draw anyway, so there you go with that. But there was another fight where I may have picked against him. Oh yeah, in the David Adelaide fight, I picked against him there as well. So I'm hesitant to pick against him if he were to take on Jarrell Miller. Either way, good fight. Shout out to Chazman. He says, yes, Hatman, I remember your original channel when you were actually in them with flashing TV in the background. You've come a long way. Big up to Chazman. Shout out to Jay for the super chat. He says, what's up, Hatman? Who do you think has the better chin? Jarrell Miller or Filip Hrgovic, and why? I think it's very close between them, to be honest with you. All right, we're going to have to block this person here who's spamming Nigerian flags in the chat. I don't know why they're doing that. Yeah, Jarrell Miller and Hrgovic, I would say that their chins are pretty similar, to be honest. Some people might give Jarrell Miller's chin the edge, owing to the fact he's never actually had an official count. He's never been down, whereas Hrgovic has. Although I would contend that the Hrgovic knockdown, which was against Zheli Zhang, wasn't a real knockdown. He was kind of pulled down by the back of his head by Zheli Zhang's right glove, I think it was. He was kind of pulled down. So, yeah, I don't really count that as a knockdown personally, but other people do. But obviously when Hrgovic got to his feet, he took many, many, many more big shots from Zheli Zhang, and they seemingly had, well, I don't want to say no effect, but he took shots bang on the chin from Zhang, the type of shots which laid waste to Joe Joyce, and obviously laid waste to Deontay Wilder as well. And Hrgovic was able to take him no problem. So, yeah, I reckon their chins are pretty close. Maybe, Jarrell Miller has got such a short neck and he tucks up quite well. It's maybe a bit more difficult to get to his chin than it is to get to Hrgovic's chin. But if you go back and look at that Hrgovic-Dubois fight, I mean, he took so many flush shots on the chin and he never looked close to going down. He was demoralized in the fight, and I think that's why we haven't seen anything of Hrgovic since, because he's kind of embarrassed about what happened. But, in terms of the concussive effect to the shots, Hrgovic was able to take him fantastically well. So, yeah, that's my take on Hrgovic's chin versus Miller's chin. But shout out to you for the super chat, Jay. And what do you think, by the way? Who do you think has got a better chin out of the two? Leo says, Hatman battle the left hooks. Prime Tour versus Prime White. I want to say David Tua would have won the fight. Yeah, I think that, if you're going to beat David Tua, you're going to need a bit of foot speed, which Dylan White doesn't have. So I would have taken David Tua to win that fight by knockout. The Joker says Dubois hurt Miller a lot more than he hurt Hrgovic. Miller looked stunned a couple times from jabs and left hooks, whereas Hrgovic never really got hurt despite getting battered late on. You know what? Come to think of it, that's a very good point, Joker. Very good point. You're right. Yeah, you're right there. Yeah, there was moments in that fight, Dubois-Miller, where Dubois landed a stiff jab, and as you say, Miller kind of shook for a little bit and rocked back on his heels. Whereas Hrgovic at no point that I can recall anyway looked hurt. Yeah, he was tired and he was getting broken down, but there was no point where I thought, oh, his legs are wobbling or anything like that. But yeah, the point I was making, as Jelly Mold is alluding to, is that it's harder to get to Miller's chin because he's got such a short neck and he keeps his hands up. So when you land on Miller, it tends to be the side of the head, maybe the side of the face, the cheek. To actually get a clean shot on his chin is more difficult than you would think because he's not a defensively blessed fighter. But again, because he's got such a short neck and he tucks his chin down, it's hard to get to it. Winning Football Tip says Wardley's not even got an opponent announced 3 months after a 1-round win. Should he be more active? I'm sure he wants to be more active, but there are so many moving parts in boxing, particularly in the heavyweight division right now. And again, we don't know what's going on with Jarrell Miller and the situation with Dimitri Salita. So unfortunately, in boxing, things tend to move a little bit slow. And but you make a good point, and it's a good question because Frank Warren is the guy with so many heavyweights. When you've got a stable of heavyweights as big as he does, it's kind of inexcusable, isn't it, that somebody would go this long without having a fight. So yeah, it's a good question. You make a good point. All right, so who else we got here in the chat? One sec. Let's make sure I got all the super chats. Yep. Tom Shaw says, is Hrgovic now training with Abel Sanchez? That's a new one on me. I haven't heard that. I can't confirm or deny. It's not something I've heard. He was obviously with God, what's the guy's name now? The guy who used to train Charlo, Black American guy. Ronnie Shields, excuse me. He was with Ronnie Shields. Is he with Sanchez now? I mean, Abel Sanchez said that he retired a few years ago, but since saying that he retired, he did train at least one fighter for a particular fight. I think it was, the last time I saw Abel Sanchez in a corner was when Gilberto Ramirez won the cruiserweight title against, what's the guy's name? Gulamarian? Sanchez was in Gulamarian's corner. Correct me if I'm wrong. But other than that, unless he decided to reverse the whole thing and come back to training full-time, I don't know. Maybe that was a one-off. But Abel Sanchez with Hrgovic, interesting pairing. If that is actually the case, we'll see what Abel Sanchez is able to do with him. All right, moving on here. Jarrell Miller, Fabio Wardley. Just in the comments, before we move on from this, let me know who you would pick in this fight between Jarrell Miller and Fabio Wardley. Who would you guys pick? Just put the name up in the comments so I can get a general feel for which way you guys would go on that fight. Okay, we got Miller points, Miller easily, Miller, TKO. Jermaine says TKO, but who? Who by TKO? Big Pharma, Miller. All right, everybody's got Miller. See, I thought I would be in a minority if I said Miller, because that was what I was tempted to say. But again, Wardley has proved me wrong twice in the past. Okay, Jermaine says Wardley by TKO. All right, a couple of people saying Wardley, but a majority of people saying Miller. I guess they think Miller's size and persistence would be a bit too much for Fabio. Interesting. That's who I would be tempted to pick myself. But again, Fabio has proved me wrong in a major way a couple times before. So, he could make a fool of me once again. Okay, I think we got some music back here. Do I fix this thing? All right. Turn it down a little bit. There we go. All right, so the general consensus among viewers at the moment is that it will probably be a Miller win. So there we have big baby Jarrell Miller. And not that you guys are interested in the technical issues going on here with the music, but the way I've set OBS up, I've put music individually into each scene. So whenever I change whatever is on screen, I would have to individually go into the settings and literally set music from scratch on each one, which is long. I don't know why OBS has decided to do me like that. On this stream. Anyway, not sure how many of you guys are familiar with this situation. Edgar Berlanga, this was after Pacheco's fight on the weekend. He put this tweet up. He said, "I'm going to get that young boy a big payday and a big butt whooping. You only getting paid $200K a fight." Sheesh. Right? So he's talking to Diego Pacheco with that. These are two DAZN fighters, obviously. Two Eddie Hearn fighters, last I checked. Unless Berlanga is out of contract now. Because I think it was a 3-fight deal, wasn't it? That Berlanga had with Eddie Hearn. So I'm not sure if he's re-signed with Hearn or what the situation is there. But certainly for his last few fights, and the most recent one being Canelo, he's been a DAZN Eddie Hearn fighter. And of course, Pacheco is an Eddie Hearn fighter. Now, for the longest time, it seemed as though the natural fight to make, between DAZN super middleweights would have been Edgar Berlanga versus Jaime Munguia. But for some reason, Golden Boy held off on making that fight. They didn't want to do it for some reason. Maybe they were preserving Munguia for Canelo, but Berlanga appeared to be up for it the whole time. So, as much as people deride Berlanga for maybe not being a particularly great boxer, he's game. And he showed that in the Canelo fight, actually. Even though he lost comprehensively, he definitely showed he had the cojones in there and, he fought bravely. So, yeah, you can say that for Edgar Berlanga. But Diego Pacheco seems up for the fight as well. So here we've got a response from Diego Pacheco. He says, that is a fight I have been open to making for a long time now. He said of Berlanga at the post-fight press conference, "Edgar Berlanga, if you are hearing this, we can run it next or whenever." So there you go. Edgar Berlanga versus Diego Pacheco. I think it's a really interesting fight. I would favor Diego Pacheco. I think he's shown more skill, more versatility. But Berlanga's tough. He's got power. He's game. And he's up for the fight. He wasn't impressed by Pacheco's performance over the weekend, obviously, judging by his tweet. But what do you guys think in the comments? Berlanga versus Pacheco. Shout out to KK for the super chat. He says, Jarrell Miller is excellent for boxing. He's definitely a character. Definitely a character. Again, just scrolling back up through the comments, and yeah, the overwhelming majority of you guys are picking Miller to beat Fabio Wardley. And again, I have to confess, that's what I would, if I was pressed on a prediction, that's what I would go with. But Fabio's proved me wrong in a big way a couple times in the past. So will it be egg on my face for a third time if I pick Jarrell Miller to beat him? Shout out to KK for the super chat. He thinks Miller is excellent for boxing. Well, boxing definitely needs characters. But in order to say that Miller is excellent for boxing, I guess you have to overlook the PED issue. And a lot of people do, because they say, look, Miller's just the guy that got caught. There's probably loads of other more high profile, more accomplished fighters than Jarrell Miller who've been taking just as many PEDs as he has. But because of their cash cow status, let's just put it that way, they get protected. Daniel Williams says, Hatman, what do you think about Turkey saying he wants to get Moses Itauma a chance at fighting for a world title this year? I think if he can't get an opportunity, and I'm talking about versus Daniel Dubois or the winner of Dubois Parker, if he can't get an opportunity against that guy for a world title to try and break Mike Tyson's record, then I don't think he should fight for a world title this year at all. The only reason, in my view, that he should be fighting for a world title this year is if the opportunity is there for him to make history. But if the opportunity is not there, then why take the risk? Why rush? Because that was the only reason to rush him, really, to try and break Mike Tyson's record. But if he can't do that, I'd say, take your foot off the gas and look to have him challenge for a world title in 2026, maybe even first half of 2027. If he continues on the trajectory that he's on with this constant improvement. Ocean Blue says, how did he look against Nelson? Didn't see the fight. Pacheco boxed. It was kind of like a workman-like performance from Pacheco against Steve Nelson. It wasn't a spectacular performance. It was a little dull, to be honest, other than the final 2 rounds where Steve Nelson managed to land a couple big shots, which Pacheco took fine. Pacheco was really in control. He was, he kind of embarrassed Sean Porter on the commentary because Sean Porter says Pacheco doesn't really use his height and reach. Well, he used his height and reach fairly well in that fight. So he kind of showed Sean Porter up a little bit there. But yeah, he boxed fairly well. He certainly won without a shadow of a doubt on the scorecards. Bust his opponent up and he did his thing. So yeah. S.A says he don't really want Pacheco. I guess you mean Berlanga. You think he's just talking to be talking? Shout out to Connor Williams. He says, what's up, Hatman? I think Miller is a nightmare match for a lot of top heavyweights. I agree with you. I think after the Dubois fight, a lot of people were too dismissive of Jarrell Miller. They actually underestimated how tough Miller made it for Dubois in there. I mean, Dubois is a guy that has good stamina. And he was tired after a couple rounds with Jarrell Miller. He had to, reach into the reserves because Miller is a massive lump. He really applies the pressure. He's got a great chin and he just keeps throwing and throwing and throwing. And as I say, in the Dubois fight, he wasn't even in the best of shape. I mean, he's never aesthetically in great shape, but I'm talking about his gas tank because he took the fight on short notice. Whereas in the Andy Ruiz fight, he had a lot more time to prepare. Wave says Berlanga called out Shiraz on Twitter. Hatman and Shiraz said we can talk after his fight with Adames. I mean, it should only be a matter of time before Shiraz moves up in weight, right? Because he's very big at 160 pounds. So I won't be surprised if he's up at 168 sooner rather than later. Okay, Kigana says, Hatman, do you think we or people will remember in 50 years from now? Okay, excuse me. Hatman, who do you think people will remember 50 years from now out of today's heavyweights? Or will people still be talking about Ali and Tyson? No, I think They'll be talking about Tyson Fury. I think they'll be talking about the main four big names 50 years from now. I really do. Yeah, because, those of us who are old enough to have some type of concept about who Muhammad Ali was and have watched his fights, and Mike Tyson as well, we obviously think highly of them. But the new generation who never grew up on Mike Tyson and certainly not Muhammad Ali, many of them revere the heavyweights today in a way that maybe fans of older generations don't really revere them. Even if they respect them, they don't hold them in the same esteem, the same regard as fighters from their own generation, 70s, 80s, 90s. So, yeah, there are youngsters growing up today who have pedestalized Anthony Joshua for years. Or they've pedestalized Tyson Fury, or they've pedestalized Deontay Wilder, or, Alexander Usyk. So I think they'll be spoken about 50 years from now. Yeah. Will they be as iconic as a Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali? I would say no. And one of the reasons for that is because, it's nothing to do with who's better, the fighters today or the fighters then. I think one of the reasons is because there was less celebrities back in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s than there is today. Today, there are just so many celebrities, and there are so many television channels. There's so much social media, YouTube, and all this type of stuff that people are distracted by different celebrities all over the place. You can't be as iconic today as a celebrity, never mind just as a sportsman or a boxer. You can't be as iconic today as celebrities were in the 1980s, for example, or the 70s, because you basically got all the attention, right? Michael Jackson in the 1980s, there's never been anything like it since. Do you know what I mean? Like, Michael Jackson's fame was crazy. And that's because there was nowhere near as many stars then as there is now. And, fewer television stations and so on. No social media, no internet. So literally everybody knew Michael Jackson. Same goes for the sports stars, Mike Tyson, Michael Jordan, all the Michaels, right? The three big Michaels from the 80s, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, and Mike Tyson, although Jordan was more 90s, but still. Shout out to Nathan for the super chat. He says, curious about your thoughts now on McCracken. I know you were critical in the past, but is it now fair to say the best AJ was under McCracken? Shout out to you for the super chat. I was critical of McCracken because AJ wasn't developing certain areas of his game under McCracken that I thought needed developing. Since leaving McCracken, he has actually developed certain areas of his game, but it hasn't worked out at the highest level. And so people who think that AJ should have stayed with McCracken because he was the best trainer for him, they're overlooking the fact that he actually lost twice he lost twice under McCracken. He lost to Andy Ruiz, and then he lost to Alexander Usyk. So basically what I'm saying is AJ was going to lose regardless if he stayed with McCracken, because he did lose when he was with McCracken twice. And so, the saying is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is broke, you need to try and fix it. So I think it was the right thing for AJ to leave McCracken. Yeah, because if he'd stayed with him, then you'll never know whether he could have been fixed if he'd gone with a different trainer. Do you know what I mean? So he had to try it. He had to go off and see if somebody else could iron out the problems that were causing him to lose these fights, because McCracken couldn't iron them out. Right? McCracken, people forget about the first Alexander Usyk fight, McCracken's performance in the corner. Somebody there saying I was unfair to McCracken. I totally disagree. I don't think I was unfair to him at all. Look, I agree with Matt. AJ left it too late to leave McCracken. I think that's what it was. I think the psychological damage that was done to AJ in those defeats was something he just never recovered from. He never recovered from it. And again, go back to the first Usyk fight. Listen to what McCracken was telling AJ in the corner. It wasn't anything that would have inspired AJ, right? It was just basically telling AJ to survive in there. So, we got Luke Partridge as always. Happy Chinese New Year. Yeah, AJ ultimately, irrespective of the trainers he was with, ultimately just didn't have the mentality to, the mental strength, succeed at the elite level over the long haul. Just didn't have it. But yeah, I agree with the person earlier on in the chat. AJ left it too late to leave McCracken. And that's what I always say with fighters. Don't wait until you lose before you change trainers. If there are certain aspects of your game that are underdeveloped and that is actually showing itself in fights, don't wait until you suffer a loss before you change. I agree there with Encircled. Yes, you should have left him after the Klitschko fight. There was enough warning signs there. But, it is what it is. Albie Reynolds says, who do you think AJ should fight next? I think he should retire. That's what I think AJ should do. I think Anthony Joshua should retire. If he insists on fighting on, as I've said several times in the past, I think he should fight one of his contemporaries, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, Dylan White, one of those. I don't think he should go anywhere near Daniel Dubois again. I don't think he should fight Martin Bicoli. I think Martin Bicoli smashes him to pieces, personally. I think AJ should fight the guys who are in a similar situation to himself, particularly Deontay Wilder and Dylan White, because they're just as washed as he is, if not more washed. So, Ocean Blue, see, you remember when Rob McCracken in the first Usyk fight said to AJ, brilliant boxing AJ, as he was getting outboxed by Usyk. People forget that. The McCracken advocates forget all about that. But yeah, so I think AJ should retire, but if he wants to carry on, fight somebody as equally damaged as himself. Then he might be in with a chance of actually winning. But all this talk of going back in against Dubois, I don't see the point. I mean, how many people were calling for Deontay Wilder to go back in against Zhilei Zhang? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, a similar thing happened to AJ against Dubois that happened to Wilder against Zhang. So, yeah, I never really understood the clamor for a rematch there. It was a one-sided drubbing. And there's too many rematches in the heavyweight division as it is. I want to see a rematch when this the first fight is competitive or there is controversy in the first fight. But if it's a one-sided drubbing, then why do it again right away? I don't see the reason. Waved says, do you respect AJ for not ducking and dodging any fights, or do you think he was supposed to and shouldn't be credited for it? Why would I think he should duck fights? Hell no. If you're a champion, you should never be ducking fights. So AJ, when he was champion, did what he was supposed to do. He fought the best available opponents out there. That's what he's supposed to do as a champion. Fans should expect all champions to be doing that. When you're not a champion, fight whoever you want. Okay, but obviously extra credit and an extra public push goes to contenders who are taking on tough challenges as they work their way towards a title shot. But if you're not a champion, well, you can do what you want because you don't get the privileges of being a champion. Don Gorgon says AJ versus Dubois 2 is almost as pointless as Yard versus Arthur 3. Actually, I think Yard versus Arthur 3 is less. I would say AJ Dubois is more pointless than that, in my opinion. Because at least with Yard versus Arthur 3, they won a piece. Arthur won the first fight. Yard came back and won the second fight easily. So there's a trilogy match, which obviously I don't care for. And I think most of you guys don't care for. But there's more justification, in my view, for that fight than AJ Dubois 2 at this stage. If AJ were to come back and miraculously get some good wins, let's say he fought Bacoli and smashed him to bits. I'm not saying that would happen. I think Bacoli would smash AJ to bits. But, a hypothetical scenario, if AJ got a few good wins under his belt, then yeah, you could say maybe have a Dubois rematch at some point. But until then, I don't see any reason for it. And there was somebody there in the comments who suggested Hrgovic as an opponent for AJ. Ade has been calling for AJ to fight Hrgovic for the longest time. And he was always saying he doesn't really rate Hrgovic. And like most people, including myself, he expected AJ to beat Dubois. But he should have, I'm talking about Ade now, he should have realized after the AJ Dubois fight that Hrgovic was actually better than he's been giving him credit for all this time. Yeah, he kind of missed something there because, again, compare Hrgovic's performance against Dubois to AJ's performance against Dubois. Hrgovic did way better than AJ. I mean, way better. Hrgovic's offense, never mind his chin, because we know Hrgovic's got a great chin, but his offense was actually better than AJ's offense, which surprised me. Yeah, I know Hrgovic has got a good offense, but I thought AJ was the sharper offensive fighter than Hrgovic, but that proved to be completely wrong. Hrgovic's offense was much better than AJ's offense against Dubois. He literally, as somebody said there, he couldn't miss with his right hand against Dubois. Now, you could say Dubois made some improvements, yeah, but if you watch that Hrgovic-Dubois fight back, Hrgovic was very intelligent with the way he was throwing his right hand. Just watch the first round alone. He kept on changing the angle of his right hand because Dubois kind of holds his left hand up to block straight right hands. So Hrgovic started throwing kind of a chopping right hand, which went over his glove, literally like an arcing shot that went over Dubois' glove and then chopped down on his head. And then when Dubois started bringing his hand up a bit higher to block the shot, Hrgovic then started coming up with uppercuts. He was doing this in the first round. Yeah, so he was very intelligent with the way he was varying his right hand. Yeah. And AJ obviously wasn't. So anyway, long story short, I think that Ade still isn't giving Hrgovic the credit he really deserves. Because, again, compare their performances against Daniel Dubois, and it's night and day. Hrgovic's performance against Dubois, in retrospect, was actually not too bad. It's just that he went a bit too right-hand crazy, in the first few rounds, and he basically punched himself out. He threw too many shots, punched himself out. He thought he was going to get Dubois out of there in a couple of rounds, and the gamble backfired. So that's what happened to Hrgovic. But while he was in there, certainly the first 3-4 rounds, Hrgovic was doing really well. Dubois' shots weren't bothering him. That great chin that he's got, Hrgovic. And he was doing his thing. He just got a bit carried away. But on the flip side, this defeat to Dubois really seems to have hit Hrgovic hard. Yeah, the thing about Hrgovic, as with many fighters like him, is when you've got a really good chin like that, it gives you a certain level of confidence that fighters who don't take such a great shot, in most cases, never really have. There are some fighters, throughout the course of history who didn't have great chins, but they were always very confident. Tommy Hearns being one of them. But generally, guys with really tough chins like that, they have, again, this self-assurance about them. Because they know no matter what happens in there, at least they're not going to get laid out, or they probably won't get laid out. So, yeah, they have a certain level of confidence. Shout out to Nathan for the super chat. He says the Zhang performance has also aged well. Indeed, it has. It has. And at the time, people were really hard on Hrgovic for the Zhang fight, whereas I was praising Zhang. Zhang turned out to be much better, excuse me, based upon the Hrgovic performance than I previously thought he was. Whereas the majority of people seem to be saying, no. It's not that Zhang was any good. It's just that Hrgovic was terrible. Do you know what I mean? They didn't give Hrgovic any credit for his performance in that contest. Okay, shout out to Libere for the super chat. He says, what was your amateur record? Who are you similar to? My amateur record was 32 or 33-6. And who was I similar to? Well, my style changed throughout my amateur days. My style kind of evolved because I was influenced by so many different fighters. So, I went through my phase in my teenage years where I was trying to do a Roy Jones impression. Went through as I got older, because I started to fill out a lot more. I was always big, athletic and muscular as a teenager. But once I started getting really big, the Roy Jones thing, yeah, that couldn't work anymore. So I started going into more like a pressure fighting style, like not quite Mike Tyson, because I never wanted to be a Mike Tyson clone, but I certainly took elements from Mike Tyson and became more of a pressure fighter. But I don't know, I kind of had I had my own style in the end. It was like an amalgam, a combination of several different influences. So I don't know, I guess this doesn't sound very flattering, but Lamont Brewster at his best. And he wasn't at his best when he fought Vlad the first time, by the way. His best was earlier on in his career when he was a bit lighter. So maybe, something similar to a Lamont Brewster. Although I reckon I had quicker feet, when I was at my best. Tom Shaw says, could you have turned professional? If I'd had laser eye surgery, I could have turned professional somewhere. With the British Boxing Board of Control, they don't allow, I'm not sure if they did at some point, but you have to have perfect vision. And I think they have allowed some people that have had laser eye surgery to get British Boxing Board of Control licenses. But a lot of getting a license with the British Boxing Board of Control, believe it or not, is politics. It's like I don't mean like parliament politics. I mean boxing politics. You have to know the right people and this, that, and the other, and have the right connections and the right in with the British board. Some guys are literally waiting years to get their license. Years. But I had many other issues as well as, not having good enough eyesight to get a professional license in the UK. I had like a dislocated shoulder, which became a chronic injury, and, many other things. So it just wasn't meant to be. Oh, LeBierre says it's pronounced Pierre. Okay, I got you. Brandon says, do you have any fight highlights? What, of my fights? I have some footage on VHS, if my parents still have it, in their house in my country of origin. But in terms of fight, I mean, we're talking about, the 1990s when I was fighting, early 2000s, so very, very long time ago. There's certainly nothing on YouTube or anything digital. There's none of my fight footage that's digitally uploaded anywhere. Have I got anything else? No, just Berlanga. I was just checking if I've got anything else to talk about here in the boxing world. Edgar Berlanga, Diego Pacheco, we've talked about them. Let's just finish off that thought with these two guys. So, Diego Pacheco and Berlanga are both highly ranked. You can see Pacheco is number 6 with the IBF. Edgar Berlanga is number 4 with the WBA. So, Berlanga's not ranked by the IBF, it seems, at the moment. And Pacheco isn't ranked by the WBA, but Berlanga is. He's there at number 4, as I say. Just below the bully, Malakuziev. That's interesting. I'd like to see that fight. With the WBC, they're both ranked. You've got Pacheco at number 3. You've got Berlanga at number 6. So there would be something to gain for Berlanga if he chose to go the WBC route. But, all roads lead to Canelo. So maybe Berlanga would be looking to go the IBF route, maybe. William Skull. Because Canelo's already given him his beating. So take on Pacheco in some kind of ranking match and get moved up. And by the way, what happened to Christian and Billy against, wasn't he supposed to fight Pacheco? Wasn't it supposed to be Billy versus Pacheco, and then Billy went missing somehow and didn't want to fight? What happened there? Anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. Diego Pacheco, Berlanga, both ranked fairly high with the WBC, but all roads lead to Canelo. And Pacheco, number 1 with the WBO, Berlanga, number 3. So perhaps Pacheco will go for Canelo before he fights Berlanga. Then again, maybe not. Maybe DAZN would want to have, and that's if Berlanga's still with DAZN, these two guys square off against each other. Then the winner can go for Canelo or William Skull, which you'd have to imagine would be a more winnable fight for either of them. Okay. Lionel says, and Billy's in a negotiation to fight somebody else. Okay, Pennant says, Hatman, can you make a heavyweight next era generation video? I've already made several of those over the last few months. If you look on my channel, I've made at least 2 videos about the next generation of heavyweights. No, I haven't seen the face-off between Chisora and Otto Wallin. I haven't been particularly compelled to watch it, to be honest. It hasn't really, caught my imagination. Workstation says, at the moment, I pick Berlanga. I think Pacheco is a promising fighter, but he still hasn't been fully tested yet right now. Yeah, we can talk about Benavidez Morel. I got Benavidez winning. Neither guy set the world alight with their last performances at 175. But for me, Benavidez was slightly more impressive. I thought that Morel looked quite poor, to be honest with you. Somebody says, Ade mentioned there's too many face-offs for almost all events now. I'd agree. Yeah, I think there is too many face-offs, yeah. They've oversaturated the boxing media with face-offs. Afro Jam says Pacheco claims and Billy ducked him. Yeah, I saw that. You said that Steve, what's his name? The guy that Pacheco fought? You were telling me that Steve, I've forgotten his surname already. The guy Pacheco just beat was a huge puncher. I got to pull you on that one. Definitely not a huge puncher. A decent puncher, but huge, that's a bit hyperbolic. Steve Nelson, yeah. Definitely not a huge puncher. He's got some power there, and it manifested mainly at a lower level. Steve Nelson, yeah. But now, a huge puncher for me would be like Adonis Stevenson. That's a huge puncher when he was at 168. Cleaning people out, making people convulse on the canvas. Stevenson was a disappointment to me. I think he could have been so much more if he'd had more ambition. But it's like once he signed with PBC and started getting those checks in Canada, Afro Jam says Stevenson fought lesser opponents though. He fought and beat far better people than Steve Nelson ever beat. He beat Tavoris Cloud. He knocked out Chad Dawson, who was world champion in one round. Fonfara and a bunch of contenders. Stevenson was a major league puncher. But yeah, as far as the Morel and Benavidez fight, I have to go with who's got the better recent form. And for me, the better recent form is Benavidez. But I guess we'll find out, right? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, Sparks. He did indeed knock out poor Tony Bellew. Yeah. He did knock out poor Tony Bellew. Let's get a different background on here. So we can do a more general boxing chat. Where's my new background? You guys will like it. Psychedelic. Where's it at? There we go. Psychedelic background. Somebody says that's Kell Brook. Yes, it is. It is indeed Kell Brook. Somebody says Hayward probably break his leg walking to the ring. I've missed the context for that comment. As in, I missed the preceding comment that would make sense of it. I have Mikey says, let's push for Hay Bellew 3. Let's not. The last time David Hay was in the ring was when he fought his friend, wasn't it? That guy who's supposed to be like a multi-millionaire or a billionaire or something, supposedly. I forget the guy's name. You know the guy who got knocked out by KSI, embarrassingly. What's that guy's name? That's the one. Thank you, Ocean Blue. Joe Fournier. Yeah, Joe Fournier. God, that was embarrassing. It was an elbow, though, to be fair. Yeah, I have to concede there for Joe Fournier. It was an elbow when he got knocked out by KSI. But it was still embarrassing. Oh, that's right, Afro Jam. Yes, you're correct. It did. It got changed to a disqualification. He appealed it, and they overturned it. That's right. Yes, yes. Forgot about that. Devin says Tyson Fury versus KSI battle of the elbows. Well, Fury's elbowing and Ngannou had no effect. Aiden says Devin Haney put a photo up in a gym with a Joe Fournier portrait on the wall. All right, 1 second, peeps. All right. Somebody says, why was Haney at a Diddy party? You'd have to ask him. It's like Epstein's list now, isn't it? Why is so-and-so in Epstein's book? And now it's like, why were you at a Diddy party? Afro Jam says, did you like Edison Miranda? Yeah, he was a fun fighter back in the days. Big puncher from Colombia. Wasn't he the guy that broke Arthur Abraham's jaw? Pretty sure it was him. S.A says, have you heard of Shaquille Thompson, 6'3" middleweight from Sheffield? They're trying to make him versus Janabek in Kazakhstan. I think I've heard of him, and I might have even seen him. He's not a baby ting fighter, is he? Who's his promoter? Somebody says Devin got diddled. Is that why he lost to Garcia? Well, lost for 5 minutes until they changed the decision because of the PED failure for Garcia. He's with GBM. Okay. Ocean Blue says those left hooks gave him PTSD. Yeah. And Mikey says, have you heard of that tall 7-foot Chinese boxer? I'm not talking about Zhang. What happened to him? Oh, you mean, was his name Choi? Or no, it wasn't Choi. I know the guy you're talking about. He was a massive 7-foot Chinese boxer. Yeah, I remember. I know who you're talking about. But he was terrible. He was terrible. He had no ability at all. I'm not sure if he was Chinese or Korean. Maybe he was Chinese, but I know the guy you're talking about from like 10 years ago or something. And he was just, god awful. Somebody says he went over to do pro wrestling. Okay. Probably doing much better over there in pro wrestling than he would have ever done in professional boxing. So, good career choice. That's the one. Yeah, I got to say pause after I mention his name. His name was Dong. Pause. Yeah, Taishan Dong. That's the guy. Oh, they cut him after a year. Oh, shame. Maybe his English weren't good enough. I don't know, but they can make it work. Afro Jam says Tank and Devin both attendees at Diddy parties. Well, Tank, I'm not surprised because Tank is, I mean, he's got some sugar in his tank as far as I'm concerned, the stuff he's been getting up to. Devin and Bill, they should know better. They should have known better than to be hanging around with Diddy. But Tank, not a surprise. Zesty indeed. A zest fest. Yeah, I hope that no commentator ever referred to Taishan Dong as Big Dong. I hope nobody ever referred to him as that. Unless they meant it deliberately as a joke, but, you know, by accident, that would have been a hell of a clanger. Afro Jam says, seen Tank get picked up by Diddy. Yeah, I saw that too, that video. Devin was in the hot tub with Diddy. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Evil Uncle Phil says, seems Tank distanced himself from Jay Prince, who looks like he was extorting him for quote-unquote protection. Well, we have to say that's alleged. So, yeah, you guys say that the Benavidez-Morrell fight is this weekend. It's crept up quick. Wasn't even thinking about it being this weekend. S.A says, oh, dong dong, if it's Diamante announcing it. Indeed. Ayed says Morrell's last fight was really bad. It was too. Did not perform well. It was against that Serbian guy whose name escapes me that fought Artur Beterbiev. I mean, he's a plucky guy, that Serbian. You know, gives it a good go. But, yeah, Hot Rod, that's the one. You got to say pause after his name as well. Hot Rod, right? Pause. He's got a lot of heart, that guy. But he did better. He did far better against Morrell than I expected him to. Shout out to Frederick. He says, new listener, loving your channel. Would love to know your history in boxing. The knowledge you have is impeccable. Well, to give you a brief summary, I started watching boxing as a kid in the mid-80s. The first boxing I ever was exposed to, that I can recall anyway, because, you know, there was boxing being watched in my home and family members' homes and stuff like that. But the first boxing I can remember being exposed to was videotapes of Muhammad Ali, because obviously this is right after the Ali era. All the adults that I grew up with were the ones that were boxing fans, were big Muhammad Ali fans. So yeah, I was watching Muhammad Ali tapes and I was really kind of taken in by his personality because he was this larger than life, you know, funny, wisecracking prankster type personality. And yeah, I was just taken in by his personality more so than his boxing at first. But then, you know, obviously as I started to watch more, I was like, wow, he's fast. And the Ali shuffle. And as a kid, I used to try and do the Ali shuffle and all that type of stuff. And so then after that, Mike Tyson comes along and I would see like clips of Mike Tyson on the news, you know, after his fights, knocking out this one and that one. But the first Mike Tyson fight I ever watched, the whole fight, was the first Frank Bruno fight. I think that was in 1988. That was the first Mike Tyson fight I'd seen from start to finish at that point. And so, yeah, I was watching boxing from then and, you know, saw Tyson Buster Douglas, which was a few fights later. There was Sugar Ray Leonard in the 80s as well, Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns. So I watched, you know, tape of them. Then going into the 90s, well, you had Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis come through from the 88 Olympics in Seoul. So I started following Lennox Lewis's career because he, rather than stay with Canada, because he won a gold medal for Canada, even though he was born in Britain, he left Britain when he was 12 years old and went to go live in Canada with his mother. But when he turned pro, he made a business decision. He realized that there was a bigger boxing audience in the UK. So it would be, you know, probably better financially, commercially, if he went back to the country he was born in and embarked on his professional career there. And, you know, he realized that there was a clamor for a British world heavyweight champion. There hadn't been one since Bob Fitzsimmons was heavyweight champion in 1897. So it was like nearly 100 years when Lennox Lewis came along. He was like the next great British hope. So people kind of ignored the fact that, you know, he grew up half of his life in Canada and had a Canadian accent. People just wanted a... And he was born in Britain and he did live in Britain until he was 12, right? So he is technically British. But there was so much of a clamor for a world heavyweight champion from Britain that people eventually got behind Lennox Lewis. It wasn't, I mean, he had to beat Frank Bruno. And even when he beat Frank Bruno, there was a lot of people making excuses for Bruno. Oh, Lewis landed a lucky punch, this, that, and the other. So anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. That's basically my background in boxing. When I was about 12, I took up amateur boxing and I boxed on and off until I was like in my mid-20s as an amateur. And throughout the 90s, I was just a boxing fiend. I would buy every single magazine, KO Magazine, Ring Magazine, Boxing Monthly, Boxing Illustrated, Boxing News. I bought those Marshall Cavendish boxing magazines that would come with a VHS tape strapped to the front of them. It was crazy. They had a whole VHS tape strapped to the front of a boxing magazine. Can you imagine that? Not a lollipop. You know, like some kids' comics would have like a little lollipop taped to the front of the magazine. No, the Marshall Cavendish, it was like a limited edition boxing magazine series. They would have a whole VHS tape strapped to the front. So, yeah, I was a boxing fiend in the 90s more so than ever when I took up boxing, when I started boxing as an amateur. And yeah, so that's my story really. In a nutshell. I've been a boxing man ever since. Okay, Rohan with an interesting question. He says, both in their prime, Dominic Brazil versus David Price. That's an interesting lower level fight, actually. I would probably go with Dominic Brazil. And the reason I say that is because both guys have been in firefights, right? But Dominic Brazil is the only one who's actually come through a firefight to win. Whenever David Price was in a firefight, even though he'd have his moments, he would lose. Whereas Dominic Breazeale fought a Nigerian, a Polish-born Nigerian, whose name escapes me right now. Maybe Afro Jam or somebody else will remember his name. But he was unbeaten at the time when he fought Dominic Breazeale, I think. And they had an absolute classic heavyweight slugfest. An absolute classic. And Breazeale came out on top. Breazeale was hurt. I think Breazeale was down in that fight. Izu Ogono, thank you. Breazeale also had a back and forth seesaw battle with Amir Mansour. I think Mansour was also unbeaten at the time, right? When he fought Dominic Breazeale. So Breazeale showed in his career that he could come through tough, instances. He come through tough fights, slugfests, where he'd get off the canvas to win. Carlos Negron, yeah, that was quite a tough fight as well. Not as tough as the Izu Ogono fight or the Amir Mansour fight, but still tough fight. So yeah, thank you for the question, because it's quite an interesting question. But I would go with Dominic Breazeale over Price. I think Breazeale was a bit tougher. Chin a bit better. And he didn't panic when he was hurt the way that David Price panicked. He knew how to come through a crisis better than Price. So that I'd have to go with Dominic Breazeale. And Circle says, Wilder gave Breazeale a nice snap. He did indeed. Shout out to James Clifford for the super chat. He says, how do you think Barry McGuigan versus Azuma Nelson would have gone if they'd fought that featherweight unification back in the days? I would have gone with Azuma Nelson. Personally. Barry McGuigan is one of these guys who had a much shorter career than people expected, and that's why he's still compos mentis now, right? He was actually tempted, after when he lost to Steve Cruz, infamously. And was it him or was it the journalist at the time that blamed it on the heat when he lost to Steve Cruz? But he was still, I think, only in his late 20s, early 30s when he retired, Barry McGuigan. And he was tempted back in the 1990s by Don King, who tried to get him come out of retirement and fight again. But yeah, anyway, long story short, I would have picked Azuma Nelson personally, but maybe you disagree, agree? Let me know what you think. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, prime for prime, Dylan White versus Frank Bruno. It's a good fight. That's a real good fight. Dylan White had more resolve than Bruno. I want to say Bruno had a better chin, but Dylan White's chin was pretty good back in the days. It was decent. But over the years, his chin really deteriorated. So if you're talking about the Dylan White that fought Chisora the first time or second time when his chin was still fairly decent, I don't know, maybe still Bruno, because Bruno had a real good jab, and even though he was basic, he was a good boxer. He could control you behind the jab. But obviously White is a much rougher individual. He's got a lot more dog in him. So, I don't know. I could see Bruno outboxing Dylan White for long stretches. People are saying Bruno would gaslight. Maybe. Well, yeah, he tended to gaslight in most fights, right? If there was any kind of pressure involved. So, it's a good one. I might go back and forth on who I think would win that fight, but it's a good one. But I could certainly see Bruno outboxing Dillian Whyte for long stretches in the fight. It's just whether Dillian Whyte can rally late to take Bruno out. Because remember, Oliver McCall couldn't get Bruno out of there. He did rally late and he did have Bruno hanging on in the final couple of rounds, but he couldn't get Bruno out of there. Yeah, Whyte does have nasty counters with a left hook, but as I say, Bruno was an underrated boxer. You know, he could control you at the end of his jab and he was physically strong, and even though it looks very basic, he was more effective than you would think at first glance. Punch Quote says, did Bruno throw an uppercut? Occasionally he did. Yeah, occasionally. And his uppercuts were quite good. I see him land some heavy uppercuts on a few guys, but it wasn't his favorite shot. All right, peeps, I'm going to wrap this one up here. Shout out to everybody who was with me for this live stream. Special shout out to everybody who donated via Super Chat. I'd like to thank each and every one of you. And until next time, take it easy, be good. I'll see you on the other side. All right, I'm out.